Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode with the Crime and Coffee Couple. My name's Allison.
And my name's Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, Al, how are you?
I'm doing good over here. How are you?
I'm good. Did you just wave?
I did.
Oh, hi. How are you? Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Hey, how are you? Our little dog thinks we're talking to her.
Oh, my gosh.
Hello, sweetie.
All right, don't ramp her up. We're sitting down to record. She's going to get Riley.
No cheese. Do not no cheese.
Yeah, I don't know what this dog, she thinks that she's just owed cheese. Since we're sitting down to record, I'm like, oh, you know what? I need a snack. So I walk over to the refrigerator. As soon as she hears the drawer open that houses the cheese, her little tail's bolting over, and she looks up with such determination and seriousness. And she's owed that cheese.
And you're like, I don't know why you think you get cheese. And I'm like, I know why. Because you give her freaking cheese every time. Like, I'm kind of the hard line on this side of the fence over here. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm the master. I don't need to give you cheese every single time I get some cheese out.
I don't know if I mentioned on this podcast, but I give out vitamins as I'm going to bed every night. We just do these Amazon Essentials multi-gummies. And before bed, I pass them out to the entire family. And our daughter has gotten into the habit of just holding her hand out as I enter her room to say goodnight. And I said it's like an episode of The Office where Jim was doing an experiment to see if he could get Dwight to respond like Pavlov's rats.
Yeah.
Dogs. Oh my gosh, I've done that before. I said Pavlov's rats. So Pavlov's dogs, where, they hear the bell, they expect food. He was doing it with mints or something like that. And it's starting to work with our family.
And Dwight just puts out his hand. And
he heard
like, what are you
the
doing?
Computer restart and just held his hand out.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I don't know. But yeah, those are pretty darn good. It's kind of nice. It's a nice little snack at the end of the night. Not even a snack, just like a nice treat.
Here's my problem, though. Oftentimes I don't remember the vitamins until after I've brushed my teeth. And now I'm introducing gummies to my freshly brushed teeth.
Yeah, and we've talked about our teeth regimen before. And yeah, got a lot of comments. A lot of people saying like, Mike, oh, boy, you're such a big boy. Flossing. Congratulations, nerd.
I'm trying to be better about flossing.
Yeah. One thing I want to get off my chest really quick. It was our daughter's birthday this week. I think it was this week.
I mean, we're recording ahead for the holidays, so who the hell knows when this is even coming out?
It was our daughter's birthday recently, and we went to get a crumble cookie for her because that was her request.
Oh, that was so funny.
We're not getting any kind of, any
sponsorship
cakes
or anything. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sure. No sponsorship. But I'm saying we didn't get cakes or pies. So she just wanted crumble cookies. So went over to crumble cookie, and we're definitely not sponsored. But I ordered it, and I got like the 6-pack, just like a bunch of them, and they gave them to me, and it was a tiny little box. And I was like, I thought they made these like a lot bigger. And I was like, that's weird. And I opened it up. I was like, hey, did you guys like make your cookies smaller? And they're like, oh, you ordered the minis. I was like, oh, man. So I went and just ordered the larger ones just because I know she would want the larger ones. So went home and then presented just the smaller ones to her just to see like what she would say. So when she got home from school, I'm like, all right, got your cookies. And she's like, oh, thank you.
She was trying to be polite,
she was
but
so
inside
sweet.
she was like, what the heck?
Yeah, and so are you. You're both like, oh, nice.
So I was bolting out of the garage to go get her at school because her bus wasn't coming, and I called you holding more than just that little box.
Yeah, I came in holding like a huge box, a little box, like two little, like 3 boxes total.
So then I was starting to question my sanity, which I probably should continue to question.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And so I was like, did I misremember seeing him? And you were so serious, like in your face, that's all I got.
I'm a pretty good liar, I must say.
So good. I am a horrible liar. And so she was trying to be polite, and then thankfully you saved the day by bringing out the actual big cookies.
And she was like, I knew it. I knew you got it. And I was like, oh, don't give me a total, everything that I deserve, because I actually got the smaller ones first incorrectly.
You're probably like, wow, these were really cheap.
Yeah. I was like, wow, they're bringing down their prices. Good for them.
For crumble.
Good
cookie.
for crumble. And I do want to get this off my chest as well, that the crumble cookies, they were kind of stale. They weren't as good. You know how like when you get them fresh and warm, they're like good.
Oh, mine were pretty good. The ones that I tasted.
The ones I got, they're like okay, like not worth a $5 cookie, whatever.
Yeah, I mean they're huge though.
They are,
but it was what she wanted for her birthday, and you can't question that. We had Chipotle and crumble cookie.
Yeah, whatever
and
the kids
want.
want.
Wonderful.
Yep, absolutely.
So, are you ready to get into this, sir?
I am.
All right. Well, let's do this. So, this is the murder of Leslie Reeves and the attempted murder of Chris Smith. So a first date oftentimes, and I will say before I go on that I've truly never been on a first date because you and I were friends before we started dating.
Yeah.
And you kind of asked me to the movies, and your friends were incidentally sitting behind us. This was all warped and planned, and how I'm sitting next to you as your wife of 22 years. Don't even ask me how I got here, but here we are.
Probably the most romantic movie ever. Kingpin, yeah.
Where they talk about something about sex really jars me loose.
Yeah, and it was like an 80-year-old lady that he was with.
I'm like, oh,
it was awesome. It was fantastic.
I mean, this guy was not charming, but that's besides the point. So I've never really been on a first date.
Yeah.
So a first date, oftentimes, from what I'm told by others, can be exciting and nerve-wracking all at the same time. You're interacting with a new person, unsure of whether or not you're going to have a connection, whether or not you're going to have another date. Who knows? We'll see.
And if you're not going to like run out of things to talk about, and like, you know, it's just like everything's up in the air. Literally everything is to chance.
Right. And I oftentimes think the idea of speed dating probably isn't a bad idea, because I would think you would know whether or not you have a connection or a spark within maybe the first 15 minutes of talking.
You got to like just sniff each other, see if the pheromones like set each other off.
Yeah, see, it's not like that for me. For me, it's like, do we have good conversation? Do I like your values? Like, I was watching a Hallmark movie and the guy was like, she's like, so where would you want to travel to if you could? And he's like, oh, I'm not into traveling. I'm perfectly happy here. And I'd be like, peace out. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Like that one statement, I'd be gone. So I might probably be a very picky person at this point.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I've got this gem next to me to the left.
True.
So this particular first date. So most dates end with, I wonder if we have a connection. Wonder if I should ask them out on another date. This date ended in absolute tragedy, and only one of the two survived. So it was the night before Thanksgiving in 2021. It was Wednesday, November 24th, when Leslie Reeves and Chris Smith met up for their first date. So they had met and started talking from an online meeting. So Chris was a 48-year-old. He was a divorced father. He worked for a pool contracting company. He was known around town as just a generally very nice guy. He often gave back to his community. He grew banana trees and massive pumpkins. He was laid back. He enjoyed spending time at his house, tending to his garden. That was his happy place. And he could often be found alongside his beagle terrier mix, Tiki. Meanwhile, Leslie was a 45-year-old divorced mom of two. She lived an hour south of Farmersville. So this story takes place in Farmersville, Illinois. She was living in Troy, and she had a master's degree in engineering and a passion for teaching Pilates as well as self-defense classes, specifically geared towards women. So according to a video that she posted on YouTube, she said it was her mission for women to empower themselves against aggression and assault as we teach you to learn self-defense techniques. And she ended the video by saying, power up. So despite her engineering degree, she decided to pursue her passion and open the All You Studio and Party Place in Troy. And here she advocated against domestic violence. She was very heavily involved in her local community. She oftentimes held classes and things like that. So despite, the fact this is all ironic that she has such a passion for protecting herself, and then she dies in this violent way. So despite her engineering degree, or I already said that, excuse me. So on Thanksgiving, this is the following day after they had their date. So her best friend, this is Nanette Stuber, she started to worry because, of course, after your friend is going on a date, you want to check in, get the details, how it went. And Nanette did exactly that, but she was unable to get a hold of Leslie. So she started to worry. She knew that Leslie had been very excited about meeting Chris. She hoped that they, would have had a connection. Knowing that her friend had gone to Chris's home in the tiny village of Farmersville, Illinois. This is about 23 miles south of the capital of Illinois, which is Springfield. So Nanette decided to call 911 because she just could not get a hold of her friend.
Well, and also it's the first date and you're like, oh my gosh,
who's this guy?
Did the guy do something?
Of course. So she called 911, she explained the situation, and she asked if they could go to Chris's house to do a welfare check. And then she decided to head over to his house herself. As she arrived,
how'd you know where he lived?
Maybe Leslie told her for safekeepings. Yeah. Oftentimes we do share information. Hey, just so you know, I'm going out with this guy. This is where we're going, etc.
Yeah.
So Nanette did. She went there, and as she arrived, she's watching Montgomery County Sheriff deputies as well as EMTs running into Chris's house. And she's sitting in her car. She's sick with worry, just waiting to hear what is going on inside that house. And then she sees EMTs come out with Chris. So she knows something terrible happened inside this house, but she just doesn't know what. There was still no sign of her friend, and she's just sitting there hoping and praying that she will see them bring Leslie alive and well out of the house. So soon detectives approached Nanette and they asked her if she had a photo of Leslie. She said, "Yes, I do," and she handed over her cell phone. And then this was the moment they gave her the devastating news and told her, "I'm sorry to have to tell you this. Your friend has been murdered." And they elaborated that she had been shot. Nanette was probably hysterical at this point, and they tried to comfort her by giving her just a sense of comfort by saying that she would have died very quickly.
That sucks.
So when EMTs came into the house, they found Chris inside the kitchen. He was barely conscious. He was unable to speak. He was rushed to the hospital, and deputies stayed at the scene searching the house. They found that the glass on the side door to the house had been broken out. The refrigerator had been pulled away from the wall. There was a pizza charred inside the oven. The kitchen table was shifted. Chairs were knocked over. It was very clear that a chaotic thing had happened in addition to this horrible sight of two people, one's critically injured, one is deceased. So obviously, based on the evidence, there's no gun found at the scene. Police now know that there was a third person involved. It wasn't, like Chris went crazy and shot Leslie and then shot himself. That wasn't the case. There was no gun at the scene.
Oh, yeah, it would still be there.
Yes. So the picture told the story that Leslie and Chris had been cooking a pizza when their assailant approached the side door. It was obvious that they had both tried to fend off the attacker when shots were fired at Chris. Leslie then ran to the living room and attempted to hide from this person who sadly got inside the house and shot her, killing her from a single gunshot wound to the head. Bullet casings from a 9mm gun were found in the kitchen and another in the living room after Leslie's body was found. And again, there's no sign of a murder weapon at this house. So Josh Easton of the Illinois State Police indicated that of the nearly 2,000 cases he'd covered to that point, this was by far the worst crime scene he had ever seen. Mm-hmm. He said there was wall-to-wall blood in the kitchen covering the cabinets, the refrigerator, and the countertops. Chris's family believe that his dog Tiki likely helped him get through the night by cuddling near his side. I assume Tiki was probably found with blood on, his coat.
Sweet puppy.
So the little pup probably sat by his owner's side because dogs are very smart. They sense when there's trouble and when something's amiss.
Yeah.
And just, huddled near Chris's body as he lay through the night bleeding. And no one in Chris's family could wrap their heads around who would have gone to his house and done such a horrific thing. An investigation obviously immediately began, and, obviously people are talking to those close to Leslie. They indicated that she was a super magnetic person. She had the ability of making you feel like you were truly the only person who existed in the world when she was having a conversation with you. And I find that is very rare. Oftentimes when I'm having a conversation, the person's like glancing at their phone. Maybe I'm just boring as hell.
If it turns out that usually these situations happen, it's probably you.
It's probably me is what it's coming down to.
I never really have the same problem, so.
In fact, before we started this podcast, I was just going on and telling Mike the story, and he's like, and I look over and he's looking down at his phone.
I was trying to send a photo to, I only have room for one thing at a time.
Yes.
And I decided I'm going to send a photo to our daughter, so I'm sorry.
Mike is not a multitasker.
No.
But she seemed like this exceptional person who just made you feel exceptionally special when she was speaking with you.
That means a lot.
So in an ironic twist, despite the fact that Leslie had this passion for helping women, specifically those that were in abusive relationships.
Well, yeah, she had the whole self-defense thing.
Absolutely. And she herself, though, was having her own set of issues in this arena. So Nanette was talking to investigators and explained that Leslie had been fearful of an ex-boyfriend. It was a contractor and a divorced father of 3, by the name of Robert Tarr, who went by Bobby. So Bobby lived in Collinsville, Illinois, which is a 15-minute drive from where Leslie was living in Troy. And they had an on-again, off-again relationship. Leslie told Nanette that it had gotten so bad that she was really moving towards blocking him on every single form of communication, social media, etc. So as Thanksgiving wore on, word of Leslie's murder began to spread. And another friend, this is Amy Steinhardt, she, obviously hears this horrific news. She herself had previously met Bobby. She did not get a good gut feeling of this guy. So she decided to contact detectives with her concerns. But by then, they were already investigating this guy.
Good.
So it's kind of like all arrows are pointing to this one person.
Yeah, you got to figure, like, immediately as you heard that she was murdered, you got to think ex-husband, ex-boyfriends. Like, it's probably not something from the guy, unless it's a jealous, girlfriend or something. But that's where my mind immediately went.
Right. So in the meantime, surgeons were working tirelessly in order to save Chris's life. They discovered that a bullet was still lodged inside his brain. Chris's mother, this is Sharon Costanza, she rushed and made the 2-hour drive to the hospital where he was in Springfield. Chris had actually been placed in a medically induced coma after he had surgery. And in his surgery, doctors removed part of his skull as well as bullet fragments from inside his brain. As family gathered at Chris's bedside, they're putting the pieces of the puzzle together because, of course, Chris is a 48-year-old man. It's not like he's calling, "Oh, Mom, I've got this date tonight." They didn't know he was on a first date that night.
Well, you could have a bunch of first dates.
Of course,
whatever.
absolutely.
You're not going to tell your parents about it until you get the third, fourth.
Not at all. So they're trying to figure out what happened, what was going on, that, who is Leslie?
Yeah.
So they, are trying to figure out what it was that happened. So they are learning that he was on his first date with Leslie. So they started to look her up online. They had never heard of Leslie before this moment. So soon they got in touch with Leslie's best friend, Nanette, and she went on to tell the family that she suspected that she knew who did this, and this is Bobby Tarr. So meanwhile, investigators traveled to Tarr's home in Collinsville. Again, this is about an hour south of where Chris lived, and he was told he needed to come to the station. And just imagine you have nothing to do with this situation. You get a little knock on the door. You open the door. There's officers there, and they're like, "We need you to come to the station." What would you say to that?
If you want me to be honest, after all these stories, I'd probably be like, "For what? Like, what are we talking about
Right,
here?"
of course. You would say, "For what?
Yeah.
What in the world would you need me to come to the station?" He didn't ask why. He just agreed to go. He didn't request a lawyer, just got in his car and went or whatever.
That's pretty telling.
I mean, that's just not natural.
No, I'd be like, "What? Why? What's happening?
What's going on? Why?" Yeah. So despite the fact that all of Leslie's friends indicated that they were broken up. I mean, Leslie was close to her friends. She told them what was going on in her life. She's like, "This guy is making me scared. I want to block all forms of communication." He's saying they're still together. Not a chance.
Yeah, he's the only guy in the world that thinks so.
Yeah. So now officers are saying, "Well, did you guys have any issues in your relationship?" And he said, "No, not more than the average couple." So now they're telling him, "Well, Leslie is dead." And he acted surprised and he said, "What?
My word."
Oh, wow. I had no idea. He said, "Well, how did she die?" So they told him she had been murdered. And of course, he immediately said he had nothing to do with her death.
I wonder if he said that before they even asked,
No, I had nothing to do.
Right. They're like, "I didn't ask you yet."
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So when he was asked if he knew where Farmersville was, he said not only had he never been there, he'd never even heard of this town.
Okay.
So he told detectives that on the night in question, he had gone to a friend's house. It was near his own. He had to go there to pick up some money. He said he was home by 6:30 that evening, and he stayed in for the rest of the night, never leaving again. Okay. And he told officers, "And you know what? I was home with my 17-year-old daughter, Shelby. She will back up my alibi."
Ooh.
So, of course, investigators are going to eventually call Shelby in. So investigators believe that Chris and Leslie had been shot in the early morning hours of Thanksgiving, somewhere around 1 a.m. And they learned that, for their first date, what they did was they went to this place called the Uptown Saloon. because Chris's friends were playing in a band at that location.
Sounds fun.
And then afterwards, they went back to Chris's house. They put a pizza in the oven, and that's when all of this happened.
It's a fun night to go out the night before Thanksgiving.
A lot of people do. So Tar's daughter is Shelby. She was brought into the station. She was placed in a separate room from her father, and I'm sure he didn't even know she was probably there at that moment. So she was questioned about Wednesday night, and she said, no, my dad actually hadn't been home all night. He went out twice. Because, of course, he's saying, I went out once. I was home by 6:30. That was it. I stayed home. So she said the first time he left was somewhere around 6:30 p.m. So this is the time that he's saying he came home. But she's saying this is the time he went out.
Man, Bobby needs to get his story straight before he starts saying, check with my daughter.
Right. I think he maybe just assumed she was going to lie or something.
Ouch.
So, he, according to Shelby, came home only 30 minutes later, which would have been somewhere around 7. And she says it wasn't long before he had to go out again. He left the house for about 2 hours, and he came back home around 9:15 p.m. So when he came back home this time, Shelby said that her dad seemed very upset, agitated. He was sobbing, and he was saying that he missed Leslie.
I'm going to guess he went to Leslie's house or something.
So Shelby said that she went to bed right around 9:30 p.m. She said she woke up to the sound of her father. It was 2:45 in the morning. And keep in mind that investigators believe that Chris and Leslie were attacked right around 1 a.m. And he told her, because she got up when she heard him, he told her that he wasn't able to sleep. She saw he, again, seemed agitated. He was pacing around, and he was starting a load of laundry. I mean, who does laundry at 2:45 in the morning?
I could see you, but
maybe.
That's about it.
So with this information, detectives went back to speak with Tar about the fact that his story was not matching that of his daughter's. And I'm sure he was like, oh, crap. At that point in time. So, I'm sure he's panicking. And suddenly, he changes his story. And he told investigators that he'd actually gone to his friend's house twice that night. But instead, he said he was back home by 8 and he did not leave again. So this, is not lining up with what Shelby is saying.
Yeah, because they're like, your daughter said 9:15,
right.
So you're lying again. So the cops know, basically, we've got our guy here. There's a good chance this is the guy. Let's start digging into him.
Right. And it's not like we're talking about an officer bringing you in and asking you months ago, what did you do? Because if that was the case, I'd be like, I have no idea. We're talking, he's saying, what did you do last night?
Yeah, and you can see maybe a couple of the times wrong, 20 minutes late or whatever, but it's like, you didn't even tell us about this second time. No. Now, which friend was it? So we can ask them if you saw them.
And when somebody is lying, they're hiding something. So as officers were speaking to Tar at the station, his home was being searched. They located his phone as well as a Glock pistol. Now, Shelby indicated that her father owned a different gun, one that investigators had not been able to locate. She explained it was big, it was army green in color. She said she had seen it on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. She went to grab a pair of socks and noticed it.
Good for her.
So that gun was at the house, and now it's suddenly gone.
Thank you, Shelby, for all this good information.
And being honest.
Absolutely.
As authorities continued to investigate, Tar remained at the station overnight as evidence just continued to stack up against him. His license plate was captured by reader cameras just after midnight on Thanksgiving, so we know now he was absolutely out at midnight. So this is the morning of the shooting. So his car was seen near a gas station, and then investigators learned that he had purchased this gas right after midnight. So when confronted at the station, they found a receipt that proved that he went to this gas station. They sat him down and they're like, you're a liar. That's all this is telling us, is that you're a liar. He argued that he simply didn't recall that he'd stopped for gas. It's like, are you on drugs? Do you have amnesia?
Right.
How could you not recall going and getting gas?
Like, you're being looked at for murder. You better come up with all these details. Yeah.
So this is despite the fact that he was firm on the fact initially that he was home by 6:30. Later, when he started changing his story because he knew he was caught, he said 8. Yet somehow he forgot to mention that he had actually gone back out again at midnight, after midnight. So the gas station in question was near his house. It was an hour from the crime scene in Farmersville. So this was a glaring red flag since it was in direct contrast to his initial statements that he had been home all night on a night that his ex-girlfriend and her date had been gunned down execution style, and investigators believe that it was significant because he wouldn't have lied about it if he had nothing to do with it.
And you're gassing up for a potential 2-hour trip, 1 hour there and an hour back.
Exactly. So with this information, he was placed under arrest. And it was important that investigators placed Tar in custody because they were fearful for Chris's safety because they had yet to locate the murder weapon. They knew it was somewhere.
Chris will be able to say it was him.
Hopefully. We don't know yet. I mean, at this point in time, he's in a medically induced coma.
Yeah.
So he was charged with Leslie's murder and Chris's attempted murder and remained firm on the fact that investigators simply had the wrong guy.
Sure.
So when Tar later spoke with journalists from 48 Hours, he finally admitted that he had actually gone to Chris's house.
Okay.
On the Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
But I was just hanging out. Like, once I saw the whole murder, I took off.
And he's sitting across from this journalist, lying through his teeth and like believing what he's saying.
What is he saying?
Like he said, okay, so remind you, he's sitting across from this journalist and like, yeah, I was there. I did go the Wednesday before. Now, mind you, this is after he told investigators that he had never even heard of Farmersville, let alone had he gone there.
Oh, that he was there the Wednesday before.
Yes.
Okay.
So he indicated that he had just happened to bump into Leslie. She was working a shift at her part-time job at the loft store. And he said that they got to chatting. She told him that she had plans to meet some friends since another friend was playing in a band that night. And she asked him if he wanted to go. He explained that he couldn't because his youngest daughter was staying with him for the week and, you know, he declined the invitation.
And it sounds like Leslie's friends would definitely say there's no chance she asked him to come to this thing.
Not a chance.
She could not stand this guy and wanted to get rid of him in her life.
So according to Tar, after he declined the invitation, Leslie continued to push that he go with her. And he asked, okay, fine. If you can't go out with me, could you follow me to Farmersville? Since she said her van was unreliable, she feared that she would ultimately become stranded on the side of the road.
This douchebag came up with this whole story.
Yeah, of course. The wheels are spinning. He knows he needs to do damage control and come up with stories.
I got to place myself in this place.
So this statement made absolutely no sense to any of Leslie's friends because she was terrified of him. She said she was going to block him on all forms of communication. It was very clear to those close to Leslie that the story was nothing more than a blatant lie. So, in fact, only weeks earlier, Leslie had told her friend that she had been on a first date with another guy, and Tar had suddenly turned up to this date. So because of this, she was starting to get concerned. She was starting to get scared because he seemed to have this unpredictable stalking behavior. So this was where, you know, she was saying, I got to block him. And she even made a chilling statement to her friend, Amy. And she said, I could literally be killed by him someday if I don't cut all contact. She said that. And then weeks later, she's gone.
Yep.
So Tar continued on with his story and indicated that he agreed to follow her to Farmersville. They arrived to Chris's house at about 7:30 p.m. He said he parked in front of her van in front of Chris's house, and that's as far as he went. He said he never went into the house. He simply left and never came back to Farmersville again. So if this was the truth, why had he lied to investigators when questioned about his whereabouts on Wednesday night? Well, he said an explanation to this question was that there was tension between his daughter and Leslie, and he didn't want Shelby to know that he had been fraternizing with Leslie that night.
Right.
So even upon his arrest, he didn't come out and say the truth. He was, however, very quick to point out the lack of physical evidence that would place him at the crime scene. So when his white Jetta, his car, was searched, there was no incriminating evidence inside, such as blood. So this was also the case when his clothing and shoes were inspected. They did not find blood. As with his car, his DNA was not found at Chris's house. So 1 week after the shootings, investigators received a phone call from a guy named Billy Adams. This is a friend of Tar's. And according to Adams, Tar called him from jail. The two spoke in a conversation that was recorded because he was behind bars. And Tar told Adams that he needed 10 minutes of his time. He asked if he could go to his house and look for some deck brackets. So he elaborated that there were aluminum brackets that were for another job. He had yet to tell his dad about them, so he asked Adams to keep quiet about what he was saying to him. And instead of looking for the brackets, he decided to contact investigators who believed that Tar was likely speaking to his friend on the phone in code, knowing that their conversation was being recorded. So with this, they went back over to Tar's home and they began searching the yard, assuming that these brackets he was speaking of was likely a gun. So they're on their hands and knees in his yard searching, and what do they find is deck brackets. Okay. So they're like, oh, shoot, okay. So now several days later, they received another phone call. This time it was from Tar's brother, and he asked them if they could meet him at Tar's house. So the family, once they got together with investigators, handed over a Ziploc bag, and they said that they had found it in the yard that had been searched only days earlier. So the bag contained a Springfield Hellcat 9mm pistol with silver-colored ammunition that just so happened to match the casings that were found at the crime scene.
All right, we got something.
So in his defense, of course, they're like, yeah, now we got this gun. He indicated that he has no idea how the gun got there. He claimed he must have been simply set up. Somebody planted it there.
Was it the green one that his daughter saw?
I believe so. So this is despite the fact that his own fingerprint had been found on the Ziploc bag that the gun was sitting inside. He claimed that he's saying to officers, had I been responsible for these shootings, do you really think I'd be dumb enough to bring the gun back to my house?
Well, we were hoping, and you did.
So it turned out, and he pointed out this fact, that his DNA and fingerprints was not found on the gun. And the lack of evidence that was on the gun at all told investigators that the weapon had just been cleaned. Because obviously a gun is going to contain fingerprints. People are holding it. They're handling it.
Well, you can also talk to him. Be like, have you ever handled this gun in your whole life? There's nothing on here. Because
nothing.
I mean, it's his gun. It's probably registered to him. Your daughter says this is your gun. She saw it in a certain spot. So did your daughter pick it up or did somebody else pick it up?
And there's no fingerprints on it.
Right.
So, however, there was one spot of DNA found on the weapon, and this DNA belonged to Leslie, and it was located on the guide rod of the gun. The evidence made it obvious that after Tar utilized this gun, he clearly cleaned it, but he missed a spot. And he was firm on the fact, okay, now he's doing damage control. Why is Leslie's DNA on the gun? He said, yes, the gun belongs to me, but she purchased it from him. So now it's Leslie's gun. So investigators turned to a close friend of Leslie's. This is Howard Bolton. He was a firearm instructor. He was very, very well aware of what type of guns Leslie owned. He indicated that Leslie often met him at a shooting range. She was actually becoming a very good shot. She even arranged a class that was called Girls with Guns not long before she was murdered. She had started to put this class together to teach women how to handle guns so that they could protect themselves. And Bolton indicated that never once had he seen her talk about this gun or utilize this gun. So this told detectives that Leslie's DNA would have gotten on the guide rod of the gun had it been fired at her at close range. So that's how her DNA got onto the gun. So Tar was indicted by a grand jury on 2 counts of solicitation of murder based on allegations by an inmate who came forward and spoke to investigators. And Tar apparently offered this man $10,000 to shoot and kill not only Chris, but also the lead detective on this case.
Awesome.
Because at this point in time, Chris is still in a medically induced coma. And obviously, Tar is probably spiraling, wondering if, God willing, this guy pulls through and survives, what is he going to tell investigators?
Yeah.
So that makes sense that he wants to get rid of Chris. And that's why investigators wanted to keep him behind bars, because they were fearful he would go and finish off the job he started.
Sure enough.
So Tar claims that this is just a lie from this other inmate, and that the $10,000 in question was just a loan that he had given his cellmate on his bond.
So he did give him 10 grand.
Apparently so, yes.
Okay.
Of course, they're going to go and look at his financials. So Chris, meanwhile, did not regain consciousness, for another 2 months. So not until January of 2022. So when he woke, everyone is just anticipating, what is he going to remember from that horrible night?
Hoping that he remembers something, because he's got a bullet lodged in his brain, by the way.
He knows nothing.
Dang.
Not only does he not remember a moment from that night, he has no idea who Leslie Reeves even is, despite the fact that the two had been texting and talking on the phone for 2 weeks
So sad.
before. Isn't that so sad?
Yeah.
It's sad all around. Obviously, investigators are thrilled that this man pulled through,
Of
but
course.
it's like, oh man, that could have been like the nail in the coffin on this guy.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. He suffered horrible, horrible brain injury. So as Chris recovered, he focused on intense physical therapy to regain the strength that he lost from being in a coma for 2 months. His left leg is partially paralyzed from his hip to his knee, and then fully paralyzed from his knee to his toes. So after his release from the hospital, he worked out at a gym on most mornings, hoping and praying that one day he could walk without assistance, desperately hoping to get his previous life back, because he was a really active guy. He went on to recover enough to at least go back to being a lead singer in his band, to have, some semblance of his previous life back. There is still a hollow point bullet lodged inside his brain.
That's too risky.
Because it's too risky. So the doctors looked at the risks and benefits and chose to just leave it in place. So Chris has really had to give up so much of everything. He had to leave his home, move back in with his mom. He no longer lives with his beloved dog, Tiki, probably because he knows his dog needs exercise and activity. And Chris is focusing on trying to walk, So not only that, but he's not able to see his 12-year-old daughter a lot, because now he's staying in St. Louis and his daughter is living with her mom 2 hours away. So he said they had always been 2 peas in a pod, and that has really affected how often he's able to see her.
Yeah, it's sad.
So Bobby Tarr's trial began in April of 2024, this year. And Chris just refused to attend. He just knew that everything that his defense, or himself if he testified, would be lying. And he just didn't want to sit there and listen to it. He's sitting there in a wheelchair listening to this nonsense.
It's some story that he can't connect to.
No. So meanwhile, Tarr indicated that he looked forward to convincing the jury that he was not a violent man. He said, he was not a violent person by nature, and there's no way that he snapped and did what he's being accused of. So prosecutors told the jury that Tarr was a man that refused to allow Leslie to live a life that didn't include him. He was unable to handle the fact that she had moved on and that she was going to see another man. And what Leslie was unaware of as she headed to Farmersville for her first date with Chris Smith was that Tarr was secretly following her. It was clear he was aware of Chris Smith because he did, when they investigated his phone, they showed he tried to find his Facebook profile. So he then headed home. He texted his friend Billy Adams and told him that he did not believe that Leslie would have made that kind of a drive just to go out with a girlfriend. He suspected that she was meeting with a dude, is what he said. So he also made searches to determine if police would be able to track his phone if he was using a virtual private network, or VPN. He was trying to figure out if he did whatever this is. I've never tried to utilize a virtual private network. I don't even know what it is, but he wanted to see if he did this, if they would be able to track his movement on his phone.
I know what it is. They should be able to, because it still has to ping the local networks.
Okay. So at about midnight on Thanksgiving now of 2021, he left his home. We know he stopped and got gas at the gas station. Surveillance videos as well as cell phone towers prove that he drove to Farmersville with the intention of killing both Leslie and Chris.
Yeah, the VPN changes like out to the internet. Like it shows like, so you go out to the internet, you're hitting like a server in wherever, Brazil, and then you hit like Netflix. So Netflix will serve you whatever Brazil would get. So that's a VPN. It changes like your location or just not your house, basically.
Oh, okay.
So in order to get to that spot, you have to get to the cell towers first before it diverts your traffic.
Got it. I know nothing about any of that. I just pick up my phone and it works. Voila.
And if you're bored by that, I apologize.
In this case, one victim is dead. Investigators know that. The other has not a shred of recollection of what happened that night.
Well, I'm glad they can ping him there because, I mean, he did it. He's definitely
Of course he did. So no one's going to know exactly step by step what happened when he arrived, but evidence has painted a picture that he tried to enter through the back door of Chris's house sometime after 1 a.m., but Leslie and Chris tried to prevent him from entering. As he gained access to the house, there was a struggle in the kitchen. Glass was broken on the side door of the home. Chairs were flipped over, the table was moved, the refrigerator was pulled away from the wall. Investigators believe that Leslie was trying to use the refrigerator to block the door, and based on where Chris was shot in the head, they believe that he was trying to crouch down next to her and help her, and then this is when he was shot. So while this was happening, it's theorized that Tar was standing still outside at this point, and then he actually shot through the window and struck Chris in the head. And obviously, Leslie was probably shocked and terrified as she watches this moment happen, so she ran to the living room to hide. Sadly, Tar managed to enter the home. He found her. He shot her once in the head, execution style.
Jeez.
Defense attorney Dan Foles argues that there is no evidence to support this theory. He points out that there is no blood or fingerprints from Leslie on the refrigerator to back up this story. He believes that based on the significant amount of blood that was found inside the kitchen, Chris likely struggled with his assailant in the kitchen. Foles indicates that this person was clearly not Tar because had Tar struggled with Chris, he himself would have been covered with blood. It would have then transferred to his Jetta, and they said they found no blood evidence inside the car.
You can clean it, obviously.
So prosecutors argue, though, by saying that the house was not bloody at the time that he left. Tar fled the crime scene, and Chris went on to bleed heavily over the course of the next 12 hours when EMS and officers arrived. It was true that forensic evidence was definitely lacking in this case, but the lies told in the interrogation room, the activity found on his phone, the license plate tracking, the discovery of the gun, it all painted the picture that this man was guilty.
Yeah.
As the evidence came together, it painted the picture of really exactly what happened that night. All along, Tar continued to maintain his innocence. He always said he wanted to tell his story to the jury. When it came down to it, he chose not to testify. He said his attorney felt that it could open the door to a slew of damning evidence during his cross-examination.
Yeah, because it's all going to be a lie.
So the defense didn't call any witnesses. Instead, they only hoped that the jury would find reasonable doubt in this case. So after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with a verdict. And what do you think the verdict was?
Guilty.
Guilty. Thank goodness. Bobby Tar was found guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder and what was incidentally during the time of this verdict being read, it was his 51st birthday. So
happy birthday, you piece of garbage.
Happy birthday, you POS rotten hell.
Yeah, loser.
So 2 months later, it was now time for his sentencing. This time, Chris Smith was in attendance because now he knows that this rat, this monster, is going to rot. So Chris spoke on that day, and he spoke about how his life has been affected since that horrible, horrible night that he has no recollection of. He describes that he basically lost his life that night without being killed. While hospitalized in a coma, looters went to Chris's house and completely cleaned him out.
I mean, that's a great idea for looters that are complete wastes of life.
Who are these people?
Man, you see somebody in a coma, you see the story, and you're like, oh, this guy's in a coma. There's nobody at his house. Let's go loot his house. What a bunch of lowlifes.
How do you sleep at night?
Ugh.
So they stole his guitar, his amps, even his above-ground pool.
They stole his pool?
Yes. They stole his pool.
That sucks.
So his house has since been sold at auction. It was torn down and nothing more than an empty lot sits there to show what his previous life was before. Tar spoke out. He maintained his innocence, and the judge went on to sentence him to 85 years in prison. Nice. So he will die and rot in that prison.
Hopefully very soon.
Meanwhile, Leslie's friends and family are left to wade through their grief and focus on keeping her memory alive. They remember her as a very good mother who basically lived for her kids. She went through life spreading love and positivity. She had always been a champion of women's safety and protection and advocated strongly for women who were in abusive relationships. They also want to remind people to please be careful that if it could happen to Leslie, who ran self-defense classes, it could happen to anyone. Chris Smith, also is advocating for men to seek help. If you are in a position where you are stalking, harassing, and abusing another woman, you need to go and get yourself some help.
Yeah, clearly you're not right. There's plenty of fish in the sea. I know it hurts, but stalking is not the answer.
It's not the answer. So he mourns the life he used to have. He is currently writing a book about, his experience and what his life has looked like through a recovery. During a moment on stage, he had a happy occasion. He proposed to his new love. This is Michelle Albrecht. She accepted his proposal, and he says that she has stayed by his side. She accepts him, for exactly who he is. And he really just wants to speak out and advocate and remind people to never give up on themselves, and that when bad things can happen in life, just keep going. And he hopes that one day he could become a motivational speaker.
And he's an example of that. I mean, like he said, he lost his life entirely, and somebody else could kill themselves and be like, my life is gone.
Right.
I'm losing my daughter. I can't, use the left side of my legs and whatever. And you can just say, cut it, I'm done. But he's carrying on.
He's carrying on. And I will give you some good news. Chris recently started utilizing a thing called a Bioness L300. It's a wireless device that he wears on his leg. It helps with his mobility. It was really, really expensive, and he had to pay for it out of pocket. Yeah. But obviously, you cannot put a price tag on your mobility. And with this device, he is now finally able to move his leg up and down. And during an interview, he indicated that he was able to walk 3 miles over the course of 2 days.
That's awesome.
So he is back up on his feet, which just, makes me so happy to think that he can get some semblance of his life back. Leslie's 2 children, meanwhile, are being raised by their father, and Bobby Tarr is still awaiting trial on solicitation to murder with that whole $10,000 that he paid the fellow inmate.
What a pathetic loser.
And it's just a reminder to, remember that love should never hurt. Love shouldn't control you. It shouldn't manipulate you. You shouldn't live in fear when you're in a relationship. And if you or someone you know is a victim of domestic violence, help is available 24/7 at the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You can call 1-800-799-7233. And that is the sad story of the murder of Leslie Reeves and the attempted murder of Chris Smith. Of what was an early morning of Thanksgiving. They were wrapping up their time together. They were going to have some frozen pizza and then probably go their separate ways to celebrate Thanksgiving with their families.
And they probably were having a great time.
Yeah.
If you were having a bad time, you'd probably split up at the bar and be like, all right, well, have a good Thanksgiving. I'll talk to you later.
Absolutely. So who even knows what their relationship would have, what would have happened there? But the point is, this monster took it upon himself to drive down there with the full intention of doing exactly what he did, except, he intended to kill Chris.
Yeah, and the problem is, we can have all the, little warnings that we want and be like, yeah, if you're thinking of stalking somebody, it's the wrong thing to do. But these people are already too far. It's like this guy thought that murder was a decent option. It's like, you're insane already.
Right.
So.
You can't wrap your head around it because it's not logical, you know.
If you're smarter than that, then you'll notice this and take some action on it. And if you're just an idiot, then you'll continue going to murder. So
right.
If you want to be smart, don't murder.
Exactly. So thank you guys so much for being here. We appreciate each and every one of you for listening. If you like what you hear, we would love it if you hopped on over to YouTube, subscribe to our channel, maybe gave us a 5-star review on Apple.
Maybe subscribe to us on Apple subscriptions or become a patron if you really, really like what we're doing over here.
Yeah, we have a lot of bonus content.
Yeah, think of us as a local mom and pop podcast. I'm Pa.
And I'm Ma.
Yeah, like, you wouldn't go to like McDonald's necessarily. You want to support the local restaurant. We're that local restaurant. So
we're the local coffee shop.
Yeah, exactly. So think of like Thanksgiving, Christmas time, everybody's sharing a little bit of this, that. Cancel your Netflix subscription. Come on over to the Crime and Coffee Couple.
We support that.
Absolutely.
So thank you guys so much, regardless of how you're listening, and just stay safe and healthy during the holidays, and we will catch you next time. Until next time.